Crystal Charter, Daughter of the Red Seal. Chapter 29. Terrified sobs clawed their way up to Maebe's hiding spot on the stone balcony. Dark clusters of shapes formed into humans, too many for Maebe to count at the awkward height she was spying from. The witch with a red band tied around his hat, it reminded Maebe of blood, grabbed at the woman closest to him. The scared lump flinched from his grasp, and yelped her fear as she tried to claw back into the huddled crowd. Magic must have seized the woman. She lifted onto her toes, knuckles clenched with terror, as she was dragged backwards towards Bloodband, bound with invisible bonds. Maebe could just make out the tear tracks streaking the filthy woman's face. "Take me instead," a deep voice pleaded. The man that threw himself in front of the woman's path was as dirty as the rest of the prisoners, dusted with layers of the cave's sandstone, until some of them looked like they had been carved from the walls themselves. The man was grizzled and exhausted despite his chivalry. Shining gold thread on his chest caught Maebe's attention, gleaming through the filth. She knew that sigil. She had seen it almost every day since she was a child. It was the crest of the Green Kingdom, embroidered into a military jacket. The man was a soldier of the Green Kingdom. He would have worked and fought alongside the artificers, like the ones who were holding the keys to his cell. "Whatever," snapped Bloodband. The woman drifting towards him was shoved with unseen hands back into the cell with a screech. The tall soldier stepped outside of the bars, squinting beneath a raised hand at the crystal lights of the cave. The metal door grated shut with a soul-shivering grind. The woman, who had been tossed back inside, banged into the bars with a painful thud, screaming for the soldier. The blonde witch raised his hand, and the woman swiveled in the cell and collapsed on the floor in a heap. No one edged forward to help her. "I hate it when I have to bind them with magic too, don't you? Always leaves me drained after," complained Bloodband. "Not me," laughed the blonde witch. "Oh, shut up. Just because the Commage let you at a few humans," scowled Bloodband. "What?" Maebe mouthed the word. Warlock. She couldn't see from her vantage point, but she was certain that neither of the witches beneath had the coal-black eyes of a warlock. They were only magic users, not takers. But he had said he had taken human life in exchange for power. A yelp of shock almost escaped Maebe's lips as the wall beside her hiding spot panged with the release of a rope. In all four corners of the cavern, hidden ropes appeared at Maebe's height and lowered to the ground from winches. The shackled ends were summoned into Bloodband's hand with his raw power. The soldier had his wrists and ankles strapped into the long ropes and was led to a metal platform, tripping over his fetters with shaking legs. Bloodband placed his hand on the small lifting crystal, and they shot up into the air. The platform sliding swiftly up the brass rod bolted to the wall. Maebe flinched back from their ascension, trying to remain unseen on her side of the chamber. The platform remained lower than the tip of the crystal, which partially covered Maebe's view. She clasped a hand over her mouth as she watched the soldier. He was levitated above the crystal point by Bloodband's magic, ropes on his wrists and ankles dangling. Fear made his eyes bulge from his head, but he refused to make a sound. "All right, tighten the winches," Bloodband called to the blonde witch still on the ground. With the whirring of artificer machinery, the cords fastened around the man's ankles and wrists and were pulled taut. Then the soldier let out a gasp of distress as he was released from the magical grip, dropping several inches without support from the witch, just above the sharp point of the crystal. The skin on his hands began bleeding from the pressure of his constraints. His muscles were bulging and tearing from the force of the shackles, yanking him in 4 directions. Fists balled, and head flopped forward with its own weight. "Got it!" came a shout from the ground. "Yeah, we good. Everything ready down there?" Bloodband called back. Hang on." Moments passed, with the pained grunts of the soldier sounding over the witch on the ground, banging something metallic. Bloodband indifferently stretched his arms over his head and looked bored. "All right, vats are down, and I've found a scraper. You keep him steady and I'll start the winches," called the ground witch. "Finally," complained Bloodband to himself. His hands raised up in concentration, and the soldier froze again, minor relief flooding his face as the pressure was taken off his joints. Then the whirring started. Slow, flowing movements of the winches, following a metal trail in the walls to the ground, lowering the human onto the pointed crystal. Not releasing his weight, but the slow descent to pull him lower. He didn't scream, at first. Not when the crystal pierced his gut, and the first trickle of streaming blood ran down its surface. Blood, Maebe realized, as she started to tremble and sweat. The dirt on the surface of the crystal was blood. Blood of other people. The scream broke from the soldier's lips as the crystal pierced through his back, punching through him, glistening red in the harsh light of the cavern. Bile rose in Maebe's throat. So slowly he was being lowered, his snagged flesh sticking to the crystal that was tearing him apart. The screams he released curdled Maebe's blood, and terror cradled her. She wanted to run, but all she could manage to do was throw her head back against the wall of the corridor and cover her mouth to keep from screaming or vomiting. Noisy breaths escaped from her nose, and she squeezed her eyes shut. Bloodband was beginning to sweat, holding the man still as he was slowly torn in two. His power would falter, and the soldier would manage to flail and shout even louder until a final, gargled cry pierced the room. "I'm letting go," came an exhausted call from Bloodband. And the human corpse swung in two parts across the room. Head and shoulders swung to one side, legs to the other, innards raining down into the metal troughs the witch on the ground had placed above him. The metal platform lowered Bloodband to the ground, where he picked up a curved pole with a strip of leather tied to the end. He began scraping the blood from the surface of the crystal with downward strokes, and his companion was shifting it with magic, moving the coagulating blood into the brass barrels. It was changing too fast to be natural, red fading to deep brown. Meticulously he scraped each facet. Maebe dared to peep through the edge after the silence fell. Tear-blurred eyes made out parts of the man left hanging from each side of the room, while the witches went about their grim task. They worked for several minutes, their grunting noises drifting up to Maebe, who had brought her breathing under control. In, out. In, out. She was building up the courage and energy to run back and find her room somehow. She knew she couldn't ask anyone for help, not with fear in her eyes, that she couldn't hide, nor the tears streaking down her face. She rested her hand on her chest to feel the slowing of her heartbeat, her palm pressed onto the lump under her shirt. I have to make it right. That's why she brought me here, Maebe thought. I have to stop this. It's payment for being such a wretched person to Certainly, and for being a horrible daughter. I have to do something. I give my blood to these people, she realized. Why do they need my blood? Resting on all fours, she just had the energy to force her shaking body to stand, and then she managed to pull herself upright. When she arrived on her swaying feet, the metal tang of her own blood from biting her tongue and the stench of human death hit her. What fleeting strength of will she had gathered deserted her. Laughter echoed from beneath in the chamber. "I'm sorry," she mouthed to the room before turning her back on the crystal. "I can't do this." From the corner of her eye, she saw the second witch getting on the platform with another human prisoner. Maebe's eyes widened. A girl, a filthy, skinny child, shivering beneath a torn dress. Ankles and wrists in the oversized shackles, splattered with the blood of the soldier who died before her. "Stop!" Maebe screamed as loud as she could, startled by her own strength. Her fingernails dug into the crumbling balustrade. She had no idea what she was doing, or if they would stop at her command. If they would put her in the cage with the others, she just knew she couldn't stand by as it happened to that child. Both witches swung their heads up. In the direct light shining from above, she saw that neither had black eyes. In an instant, pain thrummed through the back of Maebe's head, black swimming along the edge of her vision, her legs bending towards the sandstone cave beneath her. But she fought to stay up. "Oh, shit!" came a startled female voice from behind her. Sounds of commerce erupted from the cavern as Maebe turned. Confusion and instinct caused her to lift her hands to her face. Too late. Pain flashed through her nose, and she collapsed to the floor in a heap.